Well, hopefully you all managed to get a small black rock on your way in this morning. And I want you to hold that rock in your hand right now and feel the weight of it. There is a burden and a heaviness to that rock. Now, it might be small. It might only be a very small rock, a small burden. Perhaps it's only a small symbol of the heaviness that we have in life. Perhaps it is a symbol of the heaviness we've had over the last year, and what a year we have had. Last year, there were no Easter gatherings. This time last year, we couldn't meet in person. Everything went online. We'd all gone into lockdown. And the burden, the heaviness, the weight of all that is something that, few of us have ever experienced before. Even if you loved lockdown life, even if you enjoyed, a bit of quiet time, I'm sure there is someone that you know who really, really suffered. And for most of us, it was a time of great burden. And if it's not a global pandemic, then there will be something else that burdens you or threatens to burden you, whether that's work or school or relationships or finances or family. There are burdens. There is something wrong with the world. And so often we cause the problems for ourselves. Something I learned about myself over the last year is that the more I'm isolated from community, the more my stress levels go up, the more my sugar cravings go up. That's just me. For some reason, when I was feeling the problem of lockdown and I find myself dealing with it, my coping mechanism was to introduce sugar, which is like taking one black rock and adding another one to it. I thought I was coping, but it just created another problem. So much of life, when we try and deal with it, we just introduce more and more black rocks. In those readings, did you hear the burden placed on Jesus? We heard 5 sections of the story, so let me draw your attention to 5 aspects of that burden. Firstly, Jesus is burdened in the waiting. We heard he was in the Garden of Gethsemane with his disciples and he was burdened. He began to be sorrowful and troubled. He said, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Jesus is praying in his waiting, and yet it's nothing but a huge burden to him. He asks for support from his disciples that they would keep watch and wait with him. He says, "Let's wait together," but they fail him. The disciples can't carry the burden of waiting. It is too much for their eyelids. The weight of the wait. The heaviness of sitting quietly and patiently is something, we all know very well from last year. I spoke to someone just this week who is currently in hotel quarantine, hopefully being released today. I spoke to them on the phone, not in person, just to clarify. I didn't go and visit them in person. But, how about that? Being in hotel quarantine, just one room for 2 weeks to pray and to watch and to wait. Anyway, the disciples are told explicitly to keep watch, and yet they fall asleep. And that second time, Jesus just leaves them sleeping to go and pray on his own. They've sent Jesus the message loud and clear that the burden is all on him. He prays alone 3 times about the cup of suffering that he knows he has to drink from. He carries the burden entirely alone as he waits until his time is up. He feels the black rocks piling up and ready. Secondly, Jesus is burdened by restrictions. He was arrested by force. Judas arrived with a large crowd armed with swords and clubs. It's an organized, violent, aggressive movement to take away his freedom, to bring him under their control. And what this sparks in the disciples is to trigger their own violence. And this is the age-old story that has burdened humanity from the very start of our collective memory. Violence is met with more violence, which triggers further rage, and we have a history littered with war and oppression and control. The scary thing is that control and manipulation, violence, forcefulness is not just something that happens out there in the political international sphere. It is something that happens in here, in my heart. When we don't get what we want, when we don't get our own way, it seems like the most natural thing in the world to take and to grab and to control by force and manipulation. Now, Jesus puts it this way: those who live by the sword die by the sword. These black rocks just keep piling up and piling up. The most important thing to notice here is that Jesus doesn't respond with violence. He dismisses it and willingly allows the burden to be placed on him. He submits to the arrest and he carries the burden with him on the way to the cross. He's now tied, he's chained, he's connected to all these black rocks. Thirdly, Jesus is burdened by isolation. If we thought we had isolation, have a listen again to what Jesus went through. He was taken from his friends and placed before the high priest and assembly of the elders who want him dead. He's not in a comfortable suburban home. He's brought before his enemies. His friend Peter, the closest he can get, is at a distance. Peter tries to follow, but he's distanced from him. There is no one there to defend him. There are only people there out to attack with accusations, and then they hurt him and they mock him, and physically. And then not only is he isolated from his friends and stuck in the midst of his enemies, his one friend Peter, who is sitting there trying to hide, suddenly others recognize him and say, you're with Jesus, you're his friend, right? And Peter says, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know the man. Then he curses and swears that I don't know the man. How about that? Alone and isolated. He's disowned. Peter, the close friend of Jesus, the rock, the good rock he's meant to be, that the church is to be built on, the person you think, should be there for his rabbi, his teacher. Instead, he denies Jesus 3 times. The good rock has become the black rock and a burden. Fourthly, Jesus is burdened by condemnation. He's been accused before the chief priests, the religious leadership, and now he's standing before Pilate, the Roman governor. So at the time, the Romans are the oppressive rulers over the religious rulers of Israel who are wanting to get rid of Jesus. There's layers of burden here coming down on Jesus. Civilizations of burden coming down on Jesus. Pilate hears from his wife a warning. Have nothing to do with this man, because she's had a dream. She's felt the burden in her dream about what's going on. She's suffered in a dream and tries to warn Pilate. Can you feel the weight of all this? The crowd cries out, "Crucify him, crucify him." And that's how he is condemned. And fifthly, Jesus is burdened by death. He's crucified there on Golgotha, the place of the skull. With his arms outstretched wide, the burden, the weight of his own body, he can no longer hold it up, and he can't breathe. He cries out, and finally, all of that heaviness, all of brokenness and sin and evil is crushing him, and it all culminates in death. Why is Good Friday good? That sounds pretty bad. Why is Good Friday good? With all of this, Good Friday is good because all of this, everything that is wrong with the world, everything I've done, everything you've done, every sinful moment throughout history is collected up, and justice is served here on the cross. Good Friday is good because we don't need to hold on to this stuff anymore. These are not burdens that we have to carry around in the pockets of our soul. Good Friday is good because we don't have to keep passing these on to other people or throwing them around or carrying it around, just waiting for that moment when, that person did that thing to me, so I'm ready with this. We can give these up. Good Friday is good because these die with Jesus. And forgiveness reigns. Forgiveness reigns. You don't need to hide anything. You don't need to fear anything. You can even give yourself away in love and sacrifice and service to others for the good of others. You can let the burden of evil die at the foot of the cross and live a life free of condemnation yourself. When God looks at you through the cross, he sees you washed clean. Sin is real, but it is dealt with, and we don't have to live under its power. I once was talking to a married couple who had been arguing with each other about something. The husband had done something and the wife was quite upset about it. This might be a story about Erin and I, who knows? No, it was a couple that came and spoke to me. Anyway, as we were talking about it, he came to apologise for what he had done. And the wife said, "It's okay." Like, it's such a normal response for us to, when someone apologizes, we say, "It's okay." And I said, "No, it's not okay." And it's okay to say it's not okay. We don't have to minimize these things. The message of Easter is that you never have to call a black rock okay. It's just okay. You never have to say that. If you have no faith, if Jesus did not die on the cross for the sins of the whole world, if you perhaps think of yourself as a secular person, you have to do other things with these rocks. You have to come up with other ways of how you deal with that stuff. Often it's a saying, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. The message of Easter is that you can name it for what it is. This black rock in my life is not okay, but Jesus takes that burden onto himself and carries it to the cross. You don't have to pretend it is something else and just try and deal with it or forget that it exists. It goes to the cross and it dies with Jesus. You cannot find a more powerful forgiveness than the cross of Jesus Christ. So right now, we want to give everyone here an opportunity to symbolically bring their burden to Jesus. You are all invited to come to the front and bring your black rock up here and put it down at the cross. Maybe your black rock is representative of some guilt that you have been carrying with you. Maybe your rock is representative of last year in general. Maybe you need to come to Jesus with last year and give that over to him. Maybe your rock is someone else's sin that you've been carrying with you and you're ready to throw it and you need to give that over because you know Jesus died for their sin too. We do a live feed of the sermon onto YouTube. We're going to stop that now. So Joe, if you want to stop the live feed, so no one's going to come forward and suddenly end up on social media.